Welcome everyone to the AuditNet training series. Today's webinar is Detecting Corruption and Other Business Conflicts with Analytics. My name is Jim Kaplan, founder and owner of AuditNet, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today we're pleased to have with us Rich Lanza. Rich is the Grant Thornton data analytics expert, and he will be conducting the webinar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder of AuditNet with a background as a chief audit executive, Internet for Auditors pioneer, and an auditor who believes and promotes the use of audit technology. Before we proceed with our presentation, I'd like to go through a few important housekeeping points. I need everybody to pay close attention. The slides and the handouts are available for download from your event control panel, which you should see on your screen. You must enable pop-ups. If you do not enable pop-ups, you may not be able to download the slides or handouts or answer the polling questions. We are recording today's webinar, and you will receive a link to stream the recording. The link will be sent to the registered email address that you used to register for this webinar. This webinar is not authorized for group viewing, so you must view from your own computer. CPE will be provided to those who are present for the entire webinar and answer all of the polling questions. In accordance with NASBA guidelines, we will ask 6 polling questions. They will occur approximately every 20 minutes during the webinar. The polls stay open for approximately 1 minute. You must answer all polling questions during the live event in order to qualify for CPE. You need to manage your time accordingly. If you step out to address an urgent matter, you must be back in time to answer the polling question. No exceptions. So no exceptions. You must answer all of the polling questions. No partial CPE will be given. If you're joining us on the phone, via tablet or mobile device, you may not be able to respond to the polling questions during the live event. You will therefore have to send us your responses to the polling questions in a single email to webinars@auditnet.org. The email must be sent immediately following the webinar. If we receive the email after we send out the link to the recording, we cannot issue CPE, as we are not authorized to provide CPE for viewing the recording. If you're a subscriber or site license user and have requested CPE, it will be sent via an email sent to noreply@gensend.io with a link to download your certificate. You must be able to receive emails with links, and your company must allow downloads. We are not responsible for non-receipt of the email with the link. If your company has website blocks, spam filters, or firewalls preventing delivery, you must tell your IT department. You need to be able to receive emails with links from gensend.io. They should whitelist noreply@gensend.io. If you request CPE due to non-receipt, you will have to pay a $10 processing fee for us to send you the download link. Non-subscribers and non-site license users requesting CPE must pay a $10 fee for the CPE. If you indicated you do not want CPE for the webinar and change your mind and request CPE and have met the NASBA requirement, there will be a $10 fee for CPE. You may ask questions by posting in the chat box in your control panel. I'll be moderating the questions and will pass them along to Rich. After the webinar is over, you'll be asked to complete a survey in order to receive your CPE certificate. We encourage you to complete the survey so that we may improve our webinars. Thank you, and let me now turn the floor over to Rich so that he can provide his background, share with you his experience and knowledge for today's topic on detecting corruption and other business conflicts with analytics. Rich?
Great. Thanks a lot, Jim, and thanks everyone for coming today. I did want to just to quickly go through, my background, but also to really kind of quickly note with the data files that I know Jim has mentioned that there is in the handouts section of your GoToWebinar system, you're able to view the slides and a couple of files that we give away. We have a couple of other files that I have that I don't give away, but it's just a proprietary nature thing. And but with the other files, you're welcome to them. And again, that should be in your GoToWebinar toolbar there. And, I guess the video and CPE, Jim did go over already, so I just wanted to kind of quickly note that. It's always good to get all of this up front. Also, as I get into my bio, one of the key points of this webinar today is that it's based on a white paper called Detecting Corruption with Analytics, a roadmap. A lot of the content today is from that white paper, and do urge you to go check it out. I will say I believe it's only for members to actually get a copy of it, but I believe you can also request it. And therefore, if you go out to that site and talk to the International Institute for Analytics, you can learn more about getting that. But we're also going to be spending 2 hours going through the content, and you will get a lot out of that as well. So over to me and my writing and such is that I wanted to start by noting I had built a kind of a research project and then a book called Proactively Detecting Fraud Using Computer Audit Reports, and I wrote that about 12 or 13 years ago. I took every fraud type and then came up with a list of reports for each fraud type, and it was an okay list. It wasn't the the most comprehensive list, but yet it wasn't bad. And from that list, I then felt that the corruption area was the most difficult to actually write about. And for many reasons. Why is that it's so elusive. It's more of an intangible. It speaks to where decision making is kind of challenged and conflicted, and you can't really put that in accounting records. So these are things that we'll talk about today. So it was always elusive and hard to write about. But with that, I have, done my best, at least, to come up with a list of analytics and data files and approaches that you can take when applying analytics to detecting corruption. So last but not least on my list of, bios here of things I've done, in addition to working with Grant and working through developing their audit side of the house, the financial statement audit side of the house with analytics, we're utilizing this letter analytic approach quite a bit, and I'm going to talk about that towards the end of the session. You can run it too, and talk about a couple of cases where it actually helped. Not with Grant Thornton, by the way, but it was a couple of cases from my prior life, prior to Grant, that we utilized some of this textual analytic approaches. So I did want to kind of give you a little bit of a background, kind of moving into our agenda for today. And for the most part, our agenda is to go through all of the red flags and ways of identifying corruption using analytics. However, as I said, it's very elusive, so it's almost a difficult task to try to do. So as much as we're going to try to find it, you almost have to look or circumvent the data in many ways in order to actually find it. We will talk about some of the data files that we'll need to get. We'll talk about how you can bolster your compliance program using this type of analytic approach. We'll walk through a variety of types of analytics, who, what, when, where, and why type of an approach. And I like to use that kind of methodology because it really captures every perspective. And then, you can obviously think about it and see how this would help you from a continuous point of view to run as well. So, a lot of this will play out, but for the most part, we're just going to mainly talk about really good ways of trying to find corruption using analytics. So I wanted to start off by defining what is corruption quickly, and what are some of the associated red flags, and in kind of quick terms, this is from the Certified Fraud Examiner listing of types of corruption. There's bribery and illegal gratuities. We'll go through those, but that's where there's actual money or assets going back and forth between people. So you're actually, giving an envelope underneath a table to somebody with money in it and saying, please buy from me. I'd like you to influence your decision on something, or, please build this bridge or something like that, right? I mean, that's sort of corruption where you're transferring assets at that point. And illegal gratuities is where somebody knows they're going to get a gift for it. You may notice in someone's office, a procurement director's office, they may have tons of kind of party gifts and other types of things, and you wonder, hey, where'd you get that? And they go, oh yeah, this vendor takes us to a baseball game every year, and they get a box seat, and it's just awesome. And and it's something where they expect, as long as I keep this vendor around, I will get some of these benefits. And it's not so much a bribe, but it's more of a somewhat expectation. Then there's economic extortion, which I guess happens in business, but it tends to be more of where you're coercing a decision and paying, person is paying to coerce a decision. It doesn't happen as much. Conflicts of interest, though, I think is the main one, where you're influencing a decision. However, there isn't usually money or assets going back and forth at that time. I mean, just to give an example, what if your significant other's brother had a business, and it would really help your significant other's relationship with you if you gave your her brother or his brother a business, and that would be a way of influencing decision, but there's no money there, but there's other sort of perceived benefits that come from that conflict of interest. And so a lot of this, as I said, is happening outside of the books and records. Depending on which side of the coin you're on. If you're on the buyer side, you may not see any of this because it's happening off location at a baseball game, or it's happening at a pizza parlor where somebody's handing money to another person, or something like that. And that's the type of, that's where it makes it very difficult to find. But so I do find, in looking at the different fraud types that are available to us per the certified fraud examiners, there's asset misappropriation that happens a lot. There's corruption that happens 35% of the time. Asset misappropriation is over 80%. And then financial statement fraud that's happening about 10% of the time. So in looking at these three categories, I don't know if you've ever seen an optical illusion before, but actually corruption, if you believe it, the line of corruption is larger than any other line on this page. And you may not believe me, but if we'll kind of explain as we go to this next image. This is taking a look at asset misappropriation on its own. And what you'll notice here is that the largest asset misappropriation, a billing fraud, it's way over on the right-hand side, is happening 22.2% of the time. So corruption, as we noted, was 35.4%. The billing fraud, or a particular scheme, is happening 22.2%. So corruption is the largest. It's happening more than any other type of fraud out there. And just to kind of go through more numbers, I know most of the people on the call today are accountants, auditors, and and the like, and because of that, I did want to go through, some of these numbers here with you. Even though 83.5% had an asset misappropriation, they're allocated to 9 misappropriation schemes. So when you look at the top scheme frequency of billing fraud, 22.2, it's less than corruption. When you look at it, though, some of the countries have corruption as the #1 fraud type. Some others have, actually, if you look at it on a country-by-country basis, the Certified Fraud Examiner study, you'll find that some of them have billing fraud or other types of fraud higher, but on average across the world, it's, corruption wins. And in some countries, it's 67%, so it's actually leading the pack by a lot. Another thing to think about, because we follow the money, is that misappropriation fraud tends to be about 125,000, but corruption is about 200,000 on average. So, and then when you look at international corruption, you're actually looking at, about 112,000 to 500,000. So, these are ways to, kind of, I guess, look at corruption as a much higher, reason to go take a look at it. So, as we continue through this, I mean, I want to say websites you might want to look at is Transparency International. They have a perception index. Nearly 2/3 of countries fall below the midpoint of clean per their, and Peter Eigen, chairman of the Transparency International, has a great TED Talk. I don't know if you watch TED Talks, but so I have the link there. You could probably just Google his name and YouTube and find it too. But when you take a look, that TED Talk can be really inspiring as well. Last but not least, and this is very recent, I mean, Forbes reported in 2016 that FCPA fines of $2.6 billion was second only to the record amount collected in 2008, which was, I believe, the Siemens case. I could be wrong, but I believe that was the largest, kind of case that happened. And so again, throwing a lot of numbers at you, but wanting to kind of show you the power and why we should be taking a look, at corruption more so than in anything else from a fraud perspective. So just in line with our NASBA requirements and CPE, I wanted to launch our first polling question. And that is, on average, how often does corruption occur? Is it 1/3 of the time, 2/3 of the time, 75% of the time, or 90% of the time? And in looking at the questions, I usually wait till my polling questions to go through the questions. Sorry, it did look like some people can't have audio, but some people came back. Usually it's a computer problem. Like I believe we have currently over 300 people signed in, and many other registered today. And I've only gotten a few people noting the audio issue, so it's usually your computer. So I know you can't hear us, but hopefully I can. What we can try to do is chat out to the audience here. That, and then from downloading the slides, I'm not sure why that's happening. It should be in your GoToWebinar toolbar, so you should be able to actually download those slides. So I have the poll open here. Let me just take a look here. And we have it open for about 1:10, so I'll leave it open just another few seconds here. And we have 94% voted, so just trying to keep that open for everybody. So I'm just going to keep that open another 10 seconds, and then we will close the poll. I'll assume others may not care about CPE or may not hear us. Hopefully you can. All right, so let me close that poll and share that with everybody. And just taking a look at the shared results, 60% said 1/3 of the time, which is the correct answer. There are some, like countries that have had up to 2/3 of the time, but 1/3 of the time is the correct answer. So let's hide that. And we'll get back to our screen. So perfect. Okay, so just wanted to then now start talking about the red flags to detecting corruption. And in thinking about it, as we kind of noted here, I don't want to minimize misappropriation. I mean, it is one of the top frauds when you add up all the different schemes together. But if you focus your efforts on corruption, it can, you can get a lot more bang for your buck. And I find that, why is it so elusive? It's because it affects so many different people. If you think about it, anyone in your company that is selling or buying has an opportunity to be a part of a corrupt scheme, be it a conflict of interest or some other corruption. And, that kind of opens up the audience to a lot of potential fraudsters. And I also find it does live in the intangible. It lives in decision making, it lives in payments that may be made under a table, and influencing decisions that are in the mind of people. So that's very difficult to take a look for. As we think about that, though, going into someone's mind, we should be able to use textual analytics to help with that. And that's trying to take a look at data sources that people don't expect can be one of the best ways to catch people by surprise, with some of these types of activities. And usually a lot of corruption that is found, it tends to be in that capacity where some surprise kind of jumps in. So, what I find is the value is transferred outside of the accounting records. So, the audit trails, though, do remain, and you should be able to identify them down the road. So, what are some of the red flags of, detecting a corrupt scheme here? And I feel like, again, the red flags are more of like symptoms within a company. It could be normal business symptoms to have these things happen, but it's also something where the idea here is that if you start having a lot of symptoms with a given vendor, you might have a fraud, and you might have corruption. So what I also find is, and as we're going to talk through these red flags, there's a seller perspective, which people normally don't focus on, and a buyer perspective. Now I'm going to start with the buyer perspective because that's what everyone tends to think about. We tend to think of, okay, you're accepting gifts, you're accepting bribes, you're conflicting the organization for your benefit. And when I say your benefit, it's more from a buyer perspective. So when we think about it from that perspective, there's consistent winning bids to a given vendor. There's other vendors that are, essentially issuing bids later than the submission date. So what happens is, we'll talk about this. You could have a situation where a given vendor tends to always win bids, and then also they tend to get the bid in on time, and then they where everyone else is submitting late, and the reason for that is they were everyone was told very quickly, to submit their information while someone else has had the information for a long time. And just some of the red flags there, ways to find it, if you think about it, if you end up getting a bid from somebody that's so detailed and 50 pages and it's beautiful and it's wrapped up with a bow, and then everyone else's is kind of shambled together because they only had a week to pull it together, it's usually a really good sign that something's happening. You could have overpriced goods, overpurchased goods, which usually leads to obsolete goods. And this one is so cliche, but I have to say that matching the vendor to employee record based on address or name or phone number, it tends to still be a very good way to identify corruption and conflicts of interest. And I say that because it seems so simple. Like, why would someone do that and have their address down? But what they don't realize is what the vendor may be doing. So if somebody's living with you or and such, they may not realize that they're going to put your address down as their address, and hence get you caught. So other things to think about is just not receiving goods and low quality, and because you're over purchasing goods, you may have an obsolete good situation. So then how do we hide this? So it's almost like now that we, may have some of these red flags, how do you hide, the fact that you've committed that fraud? What you could do is solicit bids from a lot of high bidder type entities and relate that back to a low, to the person that you're expecting, which also may be a high bidder too, but not a market focused one. So you could kind of get some of the premier vendors in the marketplace that may be outside of your requirements, but you end up getting bids from them, and then have your buddy give you a bid that's just a little bit off of their number, and then give you a lot lower quality, and that's how that could happen. But actually, when you look at things, it's going to look quite nice. It's going to look like it works out. You may not issue a purchase order, and that just hides the fact that anything happened. You could split purchases as well, and that would hide the fact that anything happened in there as well. You could have a seller update a bid after the fact, so that would maybe allow you, if you could look at documents and look at emails, you'd be able to see that people are sending in information after the fact. Again, we talked about the short time frames for submitting bids, and self-approving a purchase order. So you actually have that per PO and then self-approve it, or like we said above, don't even issue one. and then also approve the delivery as if it occurred when it didn't occur. So these are all ways that you can hide corruption, and I do find that everything we've talked about here does leave some trails that we could detect with analytics, and we will talk about some analytics and then also show you some in Excel that you could run to catch many of the items that you're seeing here. Now, the perspective that I never thought of as much, and I think it has more impact to the organization, again, from an FCPA perspective, that's that Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, what you find is that a company can be fined for selling to a government official and taking corrupt or paying corrupt payments associated with that. And you'll find some businesses with a heavy sales type organization, heavy travel and expenditure type situation, and international business, because it needs to be an international business, that they're going to spend a lot more time looking for that type of fraud. Whereas your organization that may not have international business or such, they may not care as much, but they may also be kind of getting hit with this type of fraud day in, day out, because it's something that they're not usually thinking about. They're thinking about the other side of it more so than the seller side of the equation. So, what are you going to find? It's almost like the reverse of the buyer side with a few extra things thrown in there. It's overpriced type goods that you're selling, or unusual increases in sales to a given customer. You could inflate hours of service. I mean, I've seen one case where they actually created an entirely new employee and put that into the system, and again, on the buyer side, I guess they were getting paid to accept that, but yet it's not something that they should have accepted. And we've seen petty cash payments, where that's a pretty key area to take a look at. Gifts and entertainment expenses, especially looking at systems like Concur that track your travel and expenditure expenses, that would be something that you'd want to look at. Consulting payments, where you're paying a quote-unquote facilitating organization to help facilitate a sale, that could be in many cases that is a corrupt payment to bring on a sale, and also paying to a politically exposed person, and then receipt of inside information, which some of the this other information gets into looking at external databases. The receipt of inside information, again, it might be taking a look at emails, as opposed to taking a look at accounting records. So how do we, hide this? So from a seller's perspective, you could be using non-company devices to, go back and forth. You could use your LinkedIn account, or, use some other type of cell phone that is your personal cell phone. You could self-approve the sales order, and therefore there isn't a whole lot of people looking at what you're charging that customer. You could forge the petty cash or the gift payments to kind of make it look like it's for a different purpose than, the purpose that you're intending it for. And usually there's general ledger adjustments that will kind of work towards spreading that cost and making it look like everything's okay when in fact it's not. So I wanted to bring in these two perspectives. The white paper goes into that in much more depth, but we did want to kind of bring that out because most people look at it from just one perspective. So I now wanted to talk about the data types. How do we get into the actual data itself and start looking at I believe different sources of data, so that not only are we looking at structured data, which is what we normally work with, right? I mean, that's 80% of our time is spent in structured data, 10% maybe in external data, which we're going to talk a lot about today, and then probably 10% in things like emails and documents and such. When you think about it, 80% of the data is in the unstructured data, so 10% of it is structured and 80% of it is unstructured. But our focus is more on the structured because it's easier to look at. It's accounting records. It aligns to our focus as auditors. That it aligns to financial statements, right? So That's why we spend our time there. But really, if we're going to catch people by surprise, it's going to be kind of looking at more of the external data and taking a look more at different types of unstructured data that is out there. So let me just kind of get to this next slide here. So, in looking at the key sources of data, I wanted to start out with the internal data source types that you could get your hands on, both structured and unstructured type data that you may want to look at. And also what we want to kind of consider here is that, well, let's kind of go through these. So first off is a contract management system. Many companies don't have that. I mean, a contract management system may be a hard drive with folders in it and a lot of vendor names with contracts in them, right? I mean, it's not a really highly organized type of event. You could then consider getting that information in the folders. Also, you could get a sample of those contracts as well. I mean, it doesn't have to be every one. And the goal of that, as we'll talk about later, is to do textual analytics of that data. So we're going to talk about that later, but that's something to do. Purchase orders, vendor invoice header, which is the invoice payments, the invoice distribution, how it gets split out to the general ledger, the employee and vendor master file, so that you can map up employee to vendor addresses information, which we are going to do in a few minutes as well. Taking a look at the general ledger, and we're going to show you an example there, and how people, not only can you find conflicts there and vendor type conflicts there, but where you also could find adjustments. The email server, the web traffic log, the meeting room request system, we'll talk about that in a second, but the email and web traffic log, that can get a bit sticky. So we will talk about that in the text analytic area more, but usually you need predication. You usually need to know that a procurement officer or a buyer in the company has, let's say you have high suspicion that they're up to no good, and now you get legal to write a letter saying it's okay, and you start taking a look at their emails. But that's one that normally is more difficult to get after. The web traffic log, same thing. The meeting room request system, I thought about that as I was writing this research brief, and I just figured that might be a way of identifying if you're meeting a certain seller a lot, that you may be in a situation where they're almost giving that seller a little bit too much information and not making it independent. The related party list, getting a list of conflicts of interest that are stated, as well as a related party list, those names can really help in doing searches of your data. So let's flip it over to the seller perspective. It's similar, right? I mean, it's contract systems from their perspective, looking at sales orders as opposed to purchase orders, and approved contract price lists, so you could do matching to that price list, and invoice header and invoice distribution and general ledgers. These are all about the same. When we then get to the petty cash area, we start to kind of notice that that's an area that would be more on the seller side that they're paying out. And normally you'll see things like permit fees. It's like you had a permit officer show up once a week and collect a quote-unquote permit fee, and or inspection fee, and it's a weekly inspection fee, which could also be indicative of a corrupt payment. Travel and entertainment system, taking a look at not only the type of spend, who's it going to, procurement card, who's it going to, type of spend, but also looking at the business description. And what I find there is that just even looking at the levels of spend by certain people, be it one department title, like vice president within a certain department, in relation to others, and or especially within the selling department, of course. This is an area that you can do a lot of types of trending analysis in and learn a lot about, which we will talk about trending data quite a bit in today's session. Once again, the email server log, web traffic log, meeting room request system, where you're meeting the buyer, and then the related party list as well. So I mean, a lot of it's the same, but it's just taking it from a totally different perspective. So just keeping in line, you know, we're trying to do this every 20 minutes or so. We have our next polling question coming out here. So let me launch that polling question. So what is not a red flag of corruption? What is not a red flag? Self-approved purchase order, overpriced goods, bids are spread among sellers, or obsolete goods. So, and while we're taking a look at that, just looking at some of the comments and questions. So, you know, one question, if boards of directors decides to pad themselves with huge allowances, would that be considered corruption? Probably not under our, you know, under the definition, right? I mean, it's not something where you're coercing a decision or influencing a decision. I'm trying to think where that falls into in the whole framework, but yeah, probably maybe more of like a billing scheme or something where they're paying themselves more than they really should in the actual billing of their services. And descope meetings related to construction bids. So I'm trying to think, yeah, I apologize, I don't know what a descope meeting related to construction bids are, but you know, what about descope meetings related to construction bids? I apologize, I don't know about that, so I'm not exactly sure, but you know, I would say, you know, taking a look at any sort of meeting minutes or emails around meetings or other information, I think could be very helpful. So we'll leave this poll open another 10 or 15 seconds. I see we have about maybe 20 seconds. We have about 90% voted. And I am just closing that polling question. Just give me a second here. And I'm sharing that with everybody. And hopefully, I was trying to think here, it looks like 84%, right? Bids are spread among entities was the correct answer because we're kind of spreading out the bids. And I guess even in that case, you could have a variety of high paid bidders and then, you know, one that's just a little bit below the high bidder, as we talked about that premium scheme that could happen. But I think that, you know, in that case, I wanted to note that what you can do is, you know, bring in an independent specialist to take a look at that category. So if it is construction spend or, you know, raw material spend, you can bring in an independent party to take a look at what is the market and then take a look at what are you spending in relation to the market to determine if you're, you know, within market range or not. So those are definitely ways to make that happen. So now what I wanted to do is talk about some external data sources. And, you know, I will say that, you know, for the most part, these are used maybe, you know, 10, 15% of the time. Maybe some people within your legal team are using them. Internal auditors tend to use them at times, but I hope to show you some new ones here as well that I've, you know, found to be quite useful, and many of which I've learned from procurement specialists, you know, companies that actually go in and do something called strategic sourcing, where they'll strategically identify a category and help a company to, you know, procure within that category. So with that, but we can use it from a fraud point of view too, or detecting fraud. So the first one is open corporates, and I'm going to, we'll kind of go into these in a second and show a few examples here, but open corporates is one that allows you to take a look at the corporate nature of an organization, and take a look at related parties and other types of information there. So what's interesting, since my slide, it isn't that old, it keeps growing. It went from 84 million now to 131 million companies. So I'm just going to put in my old business here, Cash Recovery Partners, just for giggles, and take a look at that. And it comes up with some information. It's a New Jersey-based company, which is correct. It started in 2004, totally correct. And not a whole lot of information there, because I was a really small business before coming over to Grant Thornton. But you can, I'm sure, do more research and find out more about that organization. If there are issues with that organization or other types of behavior or information out there that's public, you will see that as well. And then that leads a way of not only finding related parties through that, but also any sorts of issues that may have developed. Other things to take a look at are things like the yellow pages. I'm trying to think if I can do this today. Let me just give this a try here. I'm going to try opening up my email account and show this to you, but you can do something called like an IP address locator. And let me just try to bring this forward to you. Bear with me here. And so hopefully I can do this right here. So if you open up any sort of email and go to your options in your email, you should be able to identify the IP address for that particular email. And I'm having a little bit of trouble finding it, so I may need to, just kind of keep moving along here for our purposes. But a lot of times you can find it. Sorry, I'm having trouble finding it. So I do know that you can take a look at that, more information on that particular email. I think it might be in properties. Yep, there it is. So in properties of that email, you can actually see the IP addresses that were kind of sent from and to, and there's a lot of information in here. So I do urge you to maybe take a quick lesson in IP addresses. But the reason you might want to do this in researching a given business partner is to kind of identify any situations where it is a false vendor. It's somebody that is actually kind of sending, saying that they're a certain business party when they're really not, and kind of making themselves look bigger than they really are. So that's a way of kind of looking for any sort of masking of, or I think they call it spoofing of a particular IP address. Other things to look at would be the state websites. I've found that the statelocalgov.net has a lot of links to all of the state local government type websites, and you could do things like look up my company, let's say, within New Jersey State, and learn more about that as well. So this next website, Wayback Machine, again, going to show you in a second here probably how old this one is. So it kind of dropped. That's weird. So it went from 491 billion down to 294. So I don't know what happened there. But with the Wayback Machine, in researching a particular organization, and this could be a buyer or a seller, that you're researching, I kind of just put an AuditNet, just for fun here, and noticing that AuditNet seems to have started around 98, or at least that's when Wayback started their searches, because probably Jim was doing it before then. But then, what it does is it takes snapshots each of those years. So you can actually go into like October 11th, 2001, and I can't find it. So, but with that said, you can normally find actual snapshots. Let's see if we can get one here. This is from 2005. There we go. So this is a really old kind of, looking website for AuditNet. AuditNet's been greatly updated since 2005. And then as you kind of go through and you can research this. So I guess my point of doing this would be to see if when you clicked on, February 12, 2005, let's say AuditNet had a completely different name to it, that the company had kind of changed business names or, had kind of changed their whole strategy as a business around or that's one thought. The other thought is, let's say you took a look at AuditNet and they just created themselves in 2017 and haven't been around for a while. It would also kind of, indicate maybe this business partner has, some particular issues in that they've just kind of created themselves and are trying to sell themselves to the organization. So another website to take a look at, especially from a procurement point of view, is sam.gov. Again, I should be in here, so let me try to, let's see if I can find myself in here. Give that a try here. Did I not find myself? Sorry, so I was hoping to, search records. Yeah, I thought I was in there. Okay, well, let me try that one more time. Really? Okay, so I should have been in there, and I apologize, I'm having trouble finding myself. But in taking a look at sam.gov, what you can do is not only identify certain vendors and see if they're active or not, but you can also get data access to what they call a exclusions extract data package. And that is, organizations that have been excluded from any sort of contract for a variety of reasons, and it essentially usually what you're kind of looking for is where there is a situation where they're on the OFAC list, which is basically assisting terrorists or being known to assist terrorist organizations, or you've been dropped from any sort of governmental federal governmental contract, and therefore they kind of also kind of take you off the list of procurement. So that exclusions database can be very effective both from a seller and a buyer perspective to take a look at, and would urge you to kind of look at that as well. So as we continue through this, we'll just look at this page. This is a little bit of a harder page to work with, but I wanted to note this, that we have a CIA.gov listing of all different types of organizations that, of persons that have been identified as specifically designated nationals. I think it's like SDNs, and it would be like the president of a country or the vice president or the ambassador and such, and it's for as many countries as I can find. And even though my slide goes far back here, what you need to be careful of is when you go to this website, they have this versions for prior year, and you see that little click here button. That's what you want to select. You need to kind of go to that button, and you can get the PDFs of all these different types past data, and then you can get that list in PDF format of the names. There are some programs like ACL and other programs have ways of then converting that PDF. IDEA is very good for this, and IDEA can then convert the PDF file, report file, into a text file, and then you can actually use that data. And why would you want to use it? Well, you basically, from a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act point of view, if you're selling or to any to any foreign government, and you're making payments to these specifically designated nationals, be it a gift, a travel and entertainment, etc., that's, I mean, I'm not an attorney, but it's pretty much a no-no. It's something where you need to really be careful about any payments that are being made there, especially given you're in a selling situation. It could create an illegal gratuity, a conflict of interest situation. And then if you're identified by the FCPA for that, you can be fined, or sorry, by that act. It's the Department of Justice that would, levy a case against you. You would then have a really big problem at that point. So in taking a look then of other external data, you might want to do some sort of geo-mapping of data. And I just wanted to show you my quick example here of geo-mapping. So let me just kind of try to boot over to Excel here. Just give me a second. And over here in Excel, what I've done here is downloaded. I'm going to kind of save you the the effort on this one, but what we've done is we've done a Power Query, and I brought down from a Wikipedia page just the city and state with a estimated population. So what you would want to do is actually get addresses, of the vendors, of the, I guess, well, sellers, who you are. So I mean, it would be mostly the vendors. You could also get your employees as well and put your employees and vendors together in an analysis. And just in good old Excel, I have this in the slide where to go, but it's called Power Map. And what you can do is insert a map and launch Power Map. And I hope because I'm highlighting that data it doesn't bomb me out here. So let me try a new tour. I do have one that's open already, but I'm going to try a new tour. I'm just going to bring this screen over so you could see it. And I'm going to get rid of the location field and just go with city and state. And I'm going to click on the next button. And then from a height of the bar, I'm going to click on the 2015 estimate, and that's of population. And that gives you a size. So you could do this, let's say, based on vendor spend, with a given vendor. And then what you can do just by using some of these nice little arrow buttons or, scrolling in, you can actually kind of scroll right into areas of the file. Now, I'm just looking at city and state, right? I mean, but you could obviously be looking at every little address. And then, maybe if you found a certain pocket, like I'm just going to, just head down here for a second here. And, within this particular pocket, you identified a cluster of spend within an area that you may not even expect. I mean, I've seen some companies actually, when they did this analysis, would find an area of the country and say, I hope we're not working with that vendor again because they were in that area of the country. And then sure enough, as they went into it, they saw it. So they could have searched that person by name, I suppose, and found it, right? But just by knowing the location was a way for that individual to say, I hope we're not doing business with them again. So Power Map, again, I'll just kind of quickly show you here. It's in most Excels now. You go to Insert Map and then Launch Power Map. You might have to add it as an add-in, or you might have to go out to Excel to learn more about it, kind of like what I've done here with the Download Center. But again, it's depending on your version of Excel, so that would be something to take a look at. So as we continue on here, just for a couple more slides before get into our question, next question there, I just wanted to then now talk about moving into the analytics. So now that we know the data from an internal and external perspective, we have hopefully a good feel for the red flags and why corruption is so elusive. Now, kind of, why should we even proactively review for it? Is there some of the common techniques right now that companies deploy to detect corrupt behavior are things like just doing training and having a conflict of interest form that people fill out, or or just taking a look at travel and entertainment expenses and looking for kind of oddball situations there. But I guess, to me it seems a bit weak, in what's being done, and that through analytics and through all the data that you can induce a much better decision from the data as opposed to, having more of a higher level type of review of it. So, but why would we want to therefore start looking more? The study from the ACFE also identified that fraud losses can be reduced by 65% in relation to a management tip. So instead of waiting for somebody to tell you about it, if you start looking for it, you can reduce your losses by 65%. And I believe the time to find it is reduced by 65% as well. It goes from like 18 months down to like 6. Then, looking at the elusive nature of it, when you're putting together disparate data sets around corruption, you can almost like correlate the wrongdoing. You start to find that a vendor shows up on this report and that report and another report, and by scoring that together, you can identify that you have a real problem here. And when you start looking and really understanding your data, kind of like that map from before where we looked at the map, and you could almost like look at how the map is changing over time and see from a predictive point of view, you should expect that your spend next year is in certain locations of the country, just using that example. And then when you see a new pocket of spend happen in a new area of the country, you could immediately just start to focus on that because it's new and it starts to kind of beat the prediction that you had. So by starting to benchmark and really look at your data, you have a much better chance of identifying some of the issues within that data. So what are some of the common proactive analysis that's done? We talked about a couple of these, but employee to vendor testing, the good old matching the addresses or matching the names, and we will do that test just because it's so cliche, but I do find it actually finds a lot of the conflicts of interest. A politically exposed person search would be very similar to an employee to vendor test. It's actually the same, it's just you use a different list. Instead of the employee list, you use that politically exposed person or SDN list. There's the keyword searches, which we're going to do later in the broadcast, and doing text analytics. And very common, people look for words facilitation payment or other types of words. I've never really seen the word bribe. That seems so but we'll talk about that in a little bit as well, that does sometimes happen. Travel and entertainment analysis, of course, from a keyword point of view, but also a word summary point of view, which we'll talk about, and then taking a look at the petty cash itself and looking at how that petty cash is being spent, the patterns there. Is it weekly? Is it going to a certain vendor weekly? Those are some of the things that you could identify. So with that, let me just kind of talk about some of the uncommon proactive analysis as well. So when I talked about the word summaries, it's going beyond keyword testing. We're now going to start like summarizing all the words in our contracts, emails, the meeting room request forms, the web traffic, if you could get your hands on it, and just summarize the words and then look for patterns of those words. That may be a way, I've started to argue this a bit, that may be a way to get around some of the issues, is if we could get some of the email and web traffic data and just summarize it by word. I don't know who said it, we just have words. And then based on those words, identify words that are problematic or concerning, and then focus in on those employees that are saying those words. That may be a way of kind of inducing the predication. So that's one option, but again, I'm not an attorney. Do not take my advice with that. But I just did want to note that may be an idea. But doing word summaries allows you to identify new keywords that you would have never thought of. The uncommon proactive analysis, looking for obsolete inventory and not so much relating it to bad buying, but more or less like corrupt buying. There's purchases and sales mapping, actually mapping the process of purchase orders and when are we not issuing purchase orders and sales orders, and when is somebody approving their own purchase order and sales order. These are uncommon, and we're going to show you how to do that in a few seconds here. Also taking a look at changes in the vendor information, where a person may change the vendor information from one address to another address, or change other information about that vendor to kind of hide what's actually happening. So with that, let me kind of get to our next polling question just to stay on point here, we did 3 within an hour, and we have 6 to do, so we're on point. What website searches old versions of websites? IRS, Wayback, Open Corporates, or OFAC? We'll just leave that out there for about a minute or so as I review some of the questions that came in. So one of the questions, if a procurement manager is always busy showing they're doing so much work and have all these emails, is that a sign of fraud or corruption? I think it gets to some of the sentiment analysis and textual analytics that we're going to talk about, but it may just be that you're understaffed, on your procurement officers, but it also, could be a way of masking what is happening, right? Like, if the person's very sloppy and they have information all over their office. At one company I used to work for, we had a cost recovery firm come in every year, and they actually were allowed to take a look at every post-it note that was in the organization. And if you could believe this, the post-it notes, and I'm sorry, in the procurement offices. So they would go to procurement officer offices, and if you could believe it, be allowed to go through them and look for post-it notes and other types of sort of side deals that were made. And it wasn't a corruption concern. It was actually more of a concern that they made a side deal and didn't actually put it into the system. So maybe similarly, by taking a look at their office a little bit, or seeing how clean they may be, that may be a way of kind of drilling into that a little bit more. So from a which data sources require subscription payment versus free access, I am pretty sure everything that I've shown so far is free. Open Corporates and Wayback and sam.gov and et cetera, they're all free. So I think that should be there is that white paper I wrote for the International Institute for Analytics, and that one I think you just need to request it and then it's free. But that's just another note. For private okay, right. So yeah, so I wish I did have this one. I would say D&B tends to be the best source of information. So Dun & Bradstreet. So what third-party provider has quality data for ownership information for private international companies that could be used? I do know that that Dun & Bradstreet has a kind of a great set of data. I used to suggest Hoover's, which is another organization, but what I found with Hoover's is that it was bought by Dun & Bradstreet. So it's something where I think all roads lead back to them in some way. So with that, let me close this polling question and share that with everyone and correct, as noted, the Wayback Machine is the top data source for doing searches of past information, past website information. So as we continue through this, what I wanted to then start off now with is getting into Excel. And now that we've kind of gotten through the data, the red flags, we talked about some of the analytics. I actually want to show you some analytics, and then we'll talk that through with an Excel file called the payables sample pivot file, and we'll look at that in a second. And then we'll jump into some textual analytic work as well that we'll kind of talk about how you might want to use that. And I keep using this text analytic concept or talking about it because it speaks to the 80% of data that we're not looking at, so I do feel like you should start looking at that data more, and why I keep kind of repeating that topic. Okay, so with that, the vendor to employee matches. There are, I guess first off, you want to get your vendor and employee file. You could also get that sam.gov exclusion file or that specific, or the CIA file. You want to create a field that you're going to relate on, which, you know, in our case, I think is the address field that we're going to relate on. You could also use the name field, the phone number field, the, you know, tax ID field. I mean, there's a lot of different options there, but that's usually what you use. And then I normally will kind of cut that field up a bit. So if there's like a left function, a right function, or a mid function, that can be a useful tool in doing this type of mapping. And then we're going to relate the tables together using the VLOOKUP function and then filter for any sort of matches. So let me kind of bring over to you the payables sample pivot table. And I'm actually in the vendor data here, and I'm doing a match back to the employee data. Now, for those that are really detail-oriented and identify this, there's actually a fuzzy lookup add-in to Excel that you can get from Excel, and it's something that Microsoft developed. I am going to click on it, but I'm going to tell you let's not run it today because it takes a little bit more time and it's just a little beyond our discussion today. But I wanted to note it because, you know, a lot of times when you're matching vendor to employee addresses, things don't match up as nicely as I have in this file, right? Like we have 214 Pine Street and 214 Pine Street. It's perfect. That doesn't always work that way. So you sometimes have to do a fuzzy match where instead of Pine Street, it's STR, you know, as an example, and then you won't get a match. But in our fuzzy matching, it would actually, you know, work in that particular case. And I am pretty sure you can go right out to Microsoft's website, type in fuzzy lookup, and you can identify that. Okay, so even though I've done the VLOOKUP test over here and I've mapped everything and I've done that just so that in your data it's all set to go, I'm going to create another field over to the right. What I'll do is I'll hide this field just for our purposes here. Oops, sorry about that. Let me just hide that field. And now that we're here, I'm going to create kind of a VLOOKUP for the class. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the mid function just to kind of show you. We could use the left function. Let me just show this left function to you for a second. And we'll just take the first 5 characters of that address field over here. So that's the left function. But just for kind of fun, I'm just going to take the mid function and I'm going to come over to this screen over here, and I'm going to start at the 3rd character. Okay, so it'll start at the 4 in that case, and I'll go for 5 characters. And that's 4 pin, you know, in this particular case. And we're going to copy that information down. So now we have, you know, 4 or 64 HW and etc. So that's the field that I'm going to look up on. Then I'm going to go to my employee data, just make that a little bit bigger for you, and I will do the same thing. I should have copied that, but I think did I go from the 4th record, I think, or the 3rd record? See, I'm bad memory here. This is why you got to copy things, right? So I went from the 3rd record for 5 characters, and over here you want to do the same exact thing, and then I'll copy that down as well. So now that I have that information here, what I'm going to do is put, you could bring over the employee number, but what you have to be careful of is that employee number, let me just kind of bring that down here, needs to be over on the left or on the right-hand side of the data itself. So when we do this VLOOKUP in a second, if I want to, you know, calculate a match, I would then enter equal VLOOKUP, and I'll highlight that field. Now, as I'm doing that and highlighting that, you know, to that field, you want to click on the FX button in order to open up the VLOOKUP command. And in that VLOOKUP command, I have, you know, basically I'm going to look up, sorry, D2, which is right here, and then I'm going to go over to my table array, which is over here, and I'm going to highlight all the way down. And this is a trick. I have to hit my F4 button, which is normally between your 3 and 4 key on your keyboard, the F4 button. And that will put these nice little dollar signs into the data in the right place. And then I'm going to carry over the second column from that data set, which would be the employee number. And in this case, I'm going to put in the word false. And by doing that, that actually fixes, it's an exact match. So it's exactly matching 4PIN in the third character for 5 digits over here, sorry, to 4PIN, which is right here. And it's going to bring over that employee number, which is in the second column, back to that vendor field. Now, somebody had asked, how did I copy that down from the top down? So there's a little button to the bottom right-hand corner of my data set. It turns your mouse into like into a plus symbol. And as long as you have all data over here, which we do in our case, so we always have this entered in, you can double click and it actually copies that formula all the way down in this case, the vendor master file. So that's our VLOOKUP command. You know, as someone else noted, definitely this is a bit easier in products like IDEA and ACL and Active Data for Excel and TopCats and, you know, Teammate for Analytics. You know, they're definitely easier, but these are ways to do it within Excel if you don't have any other product to work with. So just going back to our slide deck, let me just get back to, whoops, sorry, there. So we use the mid function there to kind of calculate that. What I also wanted to start doing is taking a look at enterers and approver analysis, so that what we can start doing is kind of doing almost like that process mapping flow, as we talked about, where you're kind of looking at the process, you know, within the data, and kind of looking for situations where a person is entering and approving their own information, or they're, you know, they don't approve things for a while, and then they, you know, approve just like one transaction for a given enterer, and it's like an outlier. It's a low percentage. So let's, you know, kind of go right into the data now, back into this payables data set. Just kind of do that again. Do that one. There we go. So back into the payables data. So we're going to ultimately kind of try to get to this approvers to enter type analysis, but you know, for right now, I'm going to start with my payables data file. So the payables data file has, for every accounts payable payment, we have an enterer field and an approver field. So these are the two that we have. And what I'm going to do is create a pivot table of that data. Now, this could be your purchase orders, it could be your sales orders. In this case, it's just an accounts payable file. And by inserting and going pivot table, it highlights all of the data. And now that I have that highlighted, I can actually just, you know, take the enterer field and put that into the rows, and then the approver field into the rows. Now, some people will put that into the columns, and there's nothing wrong with that. It really isn't, but I just want to show you how to do this using the row section. So now that I've done that, I'm going to click, I don't know if you noticed this, but there's a pivot table tools that's developed whenever you insert a pivot table, and by doing that, you get every option to updating a pivot table right within pivot table tools. So it's like a really nice way to work with things. And in this particular case, by going to design and report layout, I can change it to show in tabular format. I can also do not show subtotals. And then in blank rows, well, actually, no, wait. I can say, in report layout, I can select repeat all item labels. So now I have a table that has enterers and approvers, and it's kind of mapped out in this really nice format. And let me just kind of come over here. We're going to type in the word match. And by doing this, I have to be very careful about this. You can't kind of do, you can type the equal sign. Whoop, actually I can't type the equal sign. Sorry, my keyboard seems to have issues here. Sorry, hold on, maybe over here I can do it. Nope. I can here. Okay, so let me try that again. There we go. So I can hit my equal sign, and I can't, it's not good for me to click on A4. I have to type A4. It's a little bit of a trick. And you know, by typing equal A4, that's going to kind of change the nature of things. But I'm going to first put in an if statement, and then I'm going to put A4 equal to B4. So if A4 equal B4, I'm going to put in quotes a yes for a match, and then a comma after that, and then put a no if it doesn't match. And in that case, dx equals dx, it's a match, and I'm just going to then copy that down. And that was double clicking on that bottom, you know, right hand corner. And by doing that, that identifies any situations where, you know, dx was sort of mapped out to dx. Now, another interesting note here in looking at this is that we have one here, RL, that approved, you know, items that actually had no enterer. So it ended up just getting approved, and somehow the enterer was blank. So that's another oddball kind of situation. So in looking at this, this is, you know, one way to look at it is kind of calculating the matches using that if statement. So one other thing that we could do, just to kind of take this one step further, is I can then take the invoice amount or the count, but I'm going to, in this case, what I'll do is I'm going to take the invoice amount and put that in the values. And in this case, what I'll do is instead of the values being a sum of invoice amount here, I'm going to click on this drop-down button next to the sum of invoice amount and go to Value Field Settings, and then click on Show Values As. And by doing that, I can then say percentage of column total. So instead of looking at it from a dollars point of view, which gets confusing sometimes to look at things like that, what I'm going to do is look at it in more of a percentage of the total spend across the organization. And also, you know, what you could do is start to filter this and look at each person one by one. But in this case, just to look at situations where there's outliers, where there are certain people that are, you know, approving their own purchases, right? Or AP is approving KD in that case, or there's a blank approved by RL. And it's more just looking at kind of the outliers of sort of where there's a lot of approvals happening, but where there's a little of approvals happening. And I'm more interested in that, you know, so I'm kind of trying to focus in on approvals as a way of identifying the red flags or symptoms of corruption happening. There's not to say that corruption's happened, right, because somebody's approved their own PO, but it's another sign that, you know, something may be amiss in the particular data. So let me do one more test here before we go to our polling question, and that is the stratification on approval limits. So in this particular case, I have created a table over here and kind of pulling together a couple of concepts we just learned. We have the VLOOKUP command, and then we have this table over here. Now let's imagine you had approval limits of $1,000 and then $5,000 in your spend, and you wanted to find people that are putting a lot of different approvals underneath those approval limits. So they're trying to kind of fly under the radar. What you could do is to link up the approval limit to this particular section over here. And you kind of see how I built this table. The way it works, it's a little tricky, I always have to think about it myself, is I always put in a negative 500, you know, gajillion down here, because that is going to be just sort of like a really, really low negative item. So you could create that as a very large number. Then you put 0. So this will basically be anything to this point and then, you know, it'll be anything over that point. So it'll be 0, 0, and, you know, under in this case. Then I put 0.1 cent, which means up to 900, which then I put 900 as the next one, and then we put 1,000 here, and then that'll kind of set the bottom limit. I spelled that wrong. I should have put 1,000 instead of, you know, 1 comma, and then over 500 to 5,000, etc. So by setting up this little table over here, I can VLOOKUP that table. Let's kind of look at this VLOOKUP here by clicking on the FX button. For some reason, sorry, it's not working for me here. All right, let me just try this again. There we go. So what it's doing is it's going over to this B2 field. So it's actually kind of, or in this case, B7, because I'm down here. And it's looking up $223.20. And it's looking it up to that table array that we had back here, the R4 to S10. Then it's pulling in that column 2 whenever there's a match. And here's the tricky part. You have to put the word true in that statement. And Charlie Walker, who developed Topcats, it's now Teammate Analytics, gave me this trick, and I've always, you know, I love the trick, where it does a bit of a fuzzy match. It'll actually, you know, perform the way we've set up our matching here, where it kind of works from the, let's say, over 900 to 1,000. By putting that 900 there and setting it, it actually kind of sets the bottom of the limit, and then it works from there. So by putting true instead of false, false would be an exact match. True, if I click on it down here, it says it's more of a closest match. So by setting up that approval strata here, I can start to identify situations where people are just under that approval limit, like 900 to 1,000 or 4,500 to 5,000. And by creating a pivot table of this information, you can then look for vendors that are always seemingly showing up in that range. It might be okay to have that, but it might also, you know, not be okay. So what I have here in this is I created a pivot table. It's called approval testing, and just in the interest of time, we'll just kind of work with this one. And it's identifying the number of vendors, the vendors here, but then it's identifying where we have multiple over 900 to 1,000 or over 4,500 to 5,000 within our spend. And if you wanted to sort this, you could go to your sort button and go more sort options and then sort on that count field. So now you could identify that vendor, you know, 7279172 had 9 purchases within that range of 900 to 1,000 and 4,500 to 5,000. And it's a way of identifying where people may be going underneath these approval limits. So with that, let me kind of launch our next polling question, trying to stay on point here. Which Excel function strips out the middle section of the text field? Is it the right, the VLOOKUP, the middle, or the mid function? Just leave that open just for another, 30, 45 seconds or so. So one of the questions that came in was instead of using the VLOOKUP, you could use an index match function, which is wonderful, and I would urge everyone to take a look at it. I have not researched that, so I don't know, but I am sure it's a great idea in doing this. So that could be a great way of kind of doing that type of test. So we'll leave that open just for a little bit more here. I think we've actually caught up on the questions, so I will just kind of close that poll out and share that with everybody. And as you can see here, the mid function is the function to strip out those middle characters within Excel. So let me hide that. So let me get back into our Excel file here. And actually, let me go back to our slides. So just give me one more sec. There we go. So we talked about the approval limit. I wanted to, make a copy of all this information so that not only do you have the file, but you also have the slide that kind of talks to doing this type of approval limit testing. And I wanted to then talk about some of the trending type analysis that can be done, which you might want to take a look at by buyer, by enter, by date, where the transaction's happening, the supplier, summarizing by supplier, by department. It's really getting to like the who, what, when, where, and why of the data. Taking a look at the value stratification, kind of like what we should have. And in doing all of this, what I find is that the kind of by trending data in itself, you can learn just a great amount. So what I want to do is just kind of go into two different examples of that in two different files. So let me just start with our payables file here. And in the payables data itself, what I've done is I've created a pivot table here. We're going to try to recreate this, but I've tried to then look at that by who is entering the data, who is entering the accounts payable data by month and by year. So what we'll do is we'll kind of walk through that ourselves, and what we'll also kind of walk through is creating a pivot table to create a date chart so that you have every day kind of lined up as well in the data and for analysis. So let's kind of go back here. It's pretty easy to do this. So hopefully, let me just kind of get rid of my filtering here, and I'm going to insert a pivot table, and I'm going to select the enter date, just for lack of any, good reason. Let me just pick that enter date. And then I'm going to then pick the invoice amount field and put that in the values. And by just selecting pivot chart of what I've just created here and creating either a clustered column, there's a lot of different types. Maybe we'll make a line chart. I can then hit my OK button. And let me just kind of move that chart by right-clicking and saying Move Chart to a new worksheet. And by doing that, I now have a daily analysis of what happened. And it's so simple, but one of the largest frauds I ever found was looking for this type of activity and finding that a given day had a huge spike. And therefore, led to having this type of situation where they were cleaning up the books, and it really kind of speaks to how people clean up their books. Where you tend to see many times a person will kind of create a lot of mess within their workspace, and then one day decide we're going to clean all this up. And very similarly, a lot of like fraud type activity, you'll find that it'll kind of develop over time. and then one day they'll just kind of clean it all up, and then it becomes that sort of kind of cleanup situation. So that day chart is a great way of finding that. Let me kind of go back to my data file here, the payables data. I'll create another pivot table. And in this case, I'm going to select this enter date 2 in this. Oh, actually, no, I have a year, month, and day field. So let me just actually take the year field, and I'll put that into the columns. And then I'm going to put a month field into the columns as well. And I'm going to then select who entered the information into the rows column. And then we'll just kind of put the invoice amount in the values. So by doing this, I kind of very quickly noticed that there's not a lot of data in 2009. So I'm going to actually filter out 2009 for our purposes, and then just have 2010, 2011. And then I have like who entered that data by month and by year. And by pivot charting that data, I could do a clustered column, but I could also do a 3D chart, which is up on the right-hand side. It's just by selecting pivot chart that I'm able to do this. It's really kind of quick. And by doing that, let me just kind of move this chart. Again, I'll click Move Chart, move it here. And by doing so, it kind of creates this sort of analysis where we have by enterer, and by who is entering that information by month and year. And by looking at this, you can very quickly see that daily spike we were probably looking at a second ago in that chart over here probably relates to this person here, KD, because there's this massive kind of credit happening, and whereas no one else really has credits like that. So, it's a good way of looking at it from that perspective, but also kind of looking at who are some of the major players, and then who are some of the minor players in the data as well. Whereas is sometimes by rotating, by right-clicking and saying, 3D rotation, and clicking on that rotating column, you can actually rotate the data around and start to identify some of those kind of pockets of data. Let me just kind of look above it like that, where you have somebody over here, DX, not really doing a whole lot of activity, but then maybe having a little bit of a spike in November of 2010, by looking at that graph. So just by trending data, it is kind of, amazing or interesting, like what you can find, just by taking a look at that in itself. So another Excel file, which I'm not giving out, but I did want to kind of send over to everybody or show to everybody, is where you get a distribution of the accounts payable data. And this distribution would be something where you're taking accounts payable invoices and distributing it across the general ledger. So in this case here, we have account number. Let me just take a look here, and account description, and vendor number here, and then that distribution amount. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a pivot table. Let me just do this quickly here. And of that pivot table, we're going to put for a given account number, and actually we'll bring that over in the rows, and given account description, and we'll get rid of totals in a second. I'm going to also bring in how many vendors do we have. So let me just kind of bring in the distribution amount into the values. And because totals kind of bother me, I'm going to right-click them and get rid of the subtotals on each one of these, so you can right-click them. Another way to do it is in the design is just to say do not show subtotals. Go to subtotals, do not show subtotals. And by doing this, what you have now is a summary by account number and looking at how many vendors do you have per account number. So this is a great way of identifying, you have to scroll through it in this case, but it's a great way of identifying situations where you may have just one vendor, like recruiting expenses for this, for that particular account type and description, whereas other areas you may have lots of vendors for a given, description. And this case here, we have like lots of vendors. So the ones where you have lots of vendors, well, that's probably pretty well spread out and fair, but the ones where you have maybe one or two vendors for a given category, that may be less fair, and something to take a look at. So in looking at, let's kind of head back to our slide deck here. I wanted to show you the distribution analysis. Bear with me one second here. There we go. So let me just get through our slides. Okay, there we go. So what I wanted to do is make sure that we're kind of making the best use of our purchase ledgers and sale ledger data, and taking a look for accounts payable accounts in the purchase ledger side where there's sole source situations, where there's too many vendors. You might even want to look at vendors that map a lot to cost recovery categories, because they tend to be areas that companies tend to, well, they tend to be areas where there could be some value to be found within there. I find that, for example, like telephone expense or lease, building leases, they tend to have a lot of contracts that get really confusing and hard to work with. It may not be so much of a corruption scheme as much as it is a way to save money for the company, but it is something to take a look at. We also talked about trending data. I would definitely, consider trending vendor data over time. That's something we didn't talk or show you today, but you could definitely do that. And I tried to give you a picture of that distribution analysis to identify like purchases bottles, in this schedule has one vendor for that given category, and that would be somebody that, obviously would be a really good one to take a look at. So in moving on to another category or area of analytics that I think has a lot of promise for, what you could be doing from, finding corruption, I wanted to talk about textual and letter analytics. And from a text analytics point of view, the one area that a lot of people will, spend their time on is doing keyword analysis. And I find, in keyword analysis, what people tend to do is kind of get a list of words that are maybe just like 10 or 5 or 10 words and do searches on that. I'm not sure that's the best way, but it's an approach. And the reason I say that is, here's something from the WorldCom fraud as an example, and it just seems to be a really good example in that this had nothing to do with corruption, but they were using in their financial statement fraud, in the journal entries, they were using the word line costs quite a bit. And by using those words over and over again, and then another was corporate unallocated revenue accounts, and by using those words, you would never normally look for those words, like they weren't key words that you would want to really focus in on, but yet they were kind of the red flag, to what you should be looking for. And I would say that, the best way to kind of do this is to start looking at all the words and summarizing them, which we're going to speak to in a couple of minutes here, really. But by doing so, you're able to really learn a lot about what other odd patterns are within there. And you may have a fraud where somebody's using the word pineapple a lot. I mean, I think there actually was a case where it was like Project Pineapple. And, pineapple isn't a word, I mean, unless you're a grocery distributor or something, that you're going to use the word pineapple a lot in your types of sale or purchase entries. But this would be something of an oddball that you could go find. Okay, but with all that said, I wanted to talk about doing red flag searches. So we first talked about how a list of words are usually not the best, and AuditNet, you can go to that link, and this one does have a small cost to it, but this is a really nice listing of all the keywords that were identified in a survey, and it's thousands of words that you can kind of take a look at and use as a brainstorming tool when doing your types of word searches yourself. Now, what I was going to do is show you in Excel how we can do some of these word searches, and do it simply. There are way better tools for doing this than what I'm about to show you, but this is a way of still doing the work in some form yourself. So what I'll do here is, let me just kind of bring up that Excel file. Just bear with me 1 minute here. Okay, so just on your screen here, you should be seeing an Excel file. Come up in a second here. I'm watching what you're watching. Here we go. Okay, so now that we have the Excel file opened up, what I have is, on the left-hand side, I have a list of some keywords, and there's a decent number here. There's about 30 or so keywords, some of which are financial statement type words, some of which, like facilitation or gift, would be some better words to look for. Now, a lot of people have said there's no way that the company would ever use the word bribe in the data, and what I find is that the word bribe would be something that you'd normally not see in an email, like, I'm going to send you the bribe payment. But what could happen is that somebody could put it in email, we don't want this to be considered a bribe, but, or something like that, where they do talk to it hypothetically, yet don't actually, say, like, we're going to make you a bribe payment. So I would still look for the word. I mean, I think it's really interesting when you do find words like bribe and fraud in data. It does not happen very much, but when it does, it's more of a sign. And I think a lot of this is more signs. I don't even know that, when you do keyword testing, if it's a direct hit, in many cases, it more or less identifies vendors and employees that are more likely to be committing, corruption, frauds based on what you're finding in the text. Okay, so in taking a look at the data, how would we do this type of word searching? Well, the thing is, you need to kind of break it up into words. So I've done that up above here. What we're going to do down below here is, I'm going to highlight the data fields that we have data fields down below here, and then in the data menu, we're going to go text to columns, and we're going to say delimited. And in that delimited, I'm going to select space to delimit, or kind of split the field up based on the spaces, which will make words. And then I can click the finish button, and that'll kind of break it up into all of these different words that you see above. So that's up here. So now that I know how my key list over here works, and I have VLOOKUP, working to my advantage, what I can do is kind of just create a equal VLOOKUP, and I can select that business in this. I went one row down, but you could select that business field, put a comma in, and then you could highlight all of the keywords here. And by doing so, actually just wanted to check here. Yeah, so one of the things that I need to do, let me just be careful here. I think I do this up above here. No, I don't. Interesting. So obviously the VLOOKUP command works no matter what, if it's uppercase or lowercase, which I didn't realize until now. So if I go over to my range over here and highlight that range, just like I was doing, and then I hit my F4 key, which will fix that range, I can then just bring in, I'm going to bring in that first column, which is the keyword field. I'm going to bring in that first column, and then I'm just going to put a comma and then put the word false after it. And that will match anytime that there is a match to that word, and anytime that there's not, you're going to get NA. And someone did ask the question, did I mean to spell consulting expense wrong? So we spelled it like expense or something. So in that case, no, we did not mean to do that. But that would be something that you could then find using this type of matching if it was spelled correctly. So by doing that, it kind of maps things properly, and any type of matches that you'll actually have the keyword show up here, and then you would know to go back to that row and take a look at that data. So the other thing, though, that I wanted to note is that, and I know it's really manual how I'm explaining this, but you could, if you split up the fields and you had, let's say, 10 words, it wouldn't be that hard to then copy the column of data like we're doing here and just do a copy of that data to a new column over here, and then a copy of this data. And I'm not going to do all of them, but just so you kind of get the idea, I can do 3 of them here, copy that, and paste that over here. You could create kind of like a word summary in this particular schedule here, and then you could insert a pivot table on that table or range. In this case, I'm going to highlight that range here. And then, in this case, I could then do a word summary down below, and it actually would summarize all those words. And the reason I would do that is it's a way of identifying where certain words are showing up, and kind of like where we were talking before about WorldCom, where you had things like line costs. This would be a way of identifying kind of the word line costs would be happening 30,000 times, and you'd go, why is that happening? Let's go take a look at that. So, just keeping on track here, I just want to launch the next polling question. Which Excel function allows for word searches? Is it proper, VLOOKUP, trim, or text? And again, so far it looks like from a questions point of view, we're pretty caught up. So we'll get through this polling question, and then we'll have one more before we're done today. And sorry about that, I just came back here. No problem. Somebody had noted that they answered an item wrong. And I should say it doesn't really matter. It matters that you answer it, not that you're right. We just want to make sure you're alive and looking at the screen, right? So I hope all's well there. And then, somebody had also asked the question, what if you get unstructured data? How do you make sense of it using the, where do you get the information to do the VLOOKUP search? What I find is that there are some tools out there that can take text and, kind of turn it from an unstructured set of text to structured. There's even a free tool out there that Information Active has. So I don't have it in the slides, but it's Information Active text tool. But other types of products, IDEA, and I believe, gosh, I'm sorry, I believe that Teammate Analytics has some add-ins that you can buy that will also kind of do that and do like word summaries for you. So that's something else. But to your point, to the question, how do I take unstructured text like a Word document and turn it into, a word summary? Again, this free tool by Information Active does a really nice job of it, and but there are many other tools like Python and R and add-ins that you could buy that do the same thing. So with that, let's kind of head back to our poll and share that. VLOOKUP is the correct answer. That should come up in a second here for everybody to see. And that was answered by 76% of the participants as well. So I wanted to conclude as we hide that last poll, get back to our summary here. Just getting back to our slides here. The last thing I wanted to talk about is from a text analytic point of view. We talked about red flag searching. I kind of talked about, touched on how you could get email data and do, word summaries and try to kind of induce out of the data, some keywords that you may want to focus in on. But what I would also kind of think about doing is also look at letters. So we have some sources here for you to look at afterwards, but I did want to kind of note here that doing letter analytics could be useful. So I've had this up on the screen here where, we have it, oops, sorry, it does, hopefully you could read that, can you read this? Like, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place. And by doing that, we're actually kind of putting, our brain is putting together the word by actually looking at the first and last letter. And what I figured out in looking at this is if you've ever looked at Benford's Law, and Benford's Law is looking at the first digits of numbers, that there's a law, or almost not a law, but there's a pattern to the first letter of words as well. And that way you can kind of, start to kind of look at those patterns. So in looking at this type of analysis where this is actually looking at song titles, British song titles, and looking at how things change between the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. And you can kind of notice that RE is jumping up in the song titles in the 80s and 90s, and just kind of quickly getting into, why. It was because the technology changed in the 80s where you could actually remix, or the word remix happened a lot more because people were using it. And if you actually look at it, in the 60s and 70s, there was one instance of the word remix, and then in the 80s and 90s, it was just thousands, and it was just something where you could see how, by looking at the patterns of letters, how that changes. And the reason I bring this up is a couple of reasons. One is that it really nicely frames your data so that you can start framing things into the first letter and first two letters. And by looking at all of these links here, one of the ones that you might find humorous at the bottom there is that this type of technique can really help with Wheel of Fortune, which is a game show that we have in the US. I think it's called America's Game, but it's essentially taking a look at letter patterns. And I've noticed, I've actually done research in that article that's listed at the bottom of that slide, that speaks to how you can do a lot better by trying to pick the first and last letters of words. So we analyzed all of the word answers within within Wheel of Fortune for something like 5 years. And what we found was most people, if you ever watch the show, they pick C, M, D, and A as like the bonus puzzle type letters. And it's just, certain letters that tend to, I don't know why people even pick them. They just, it was almost like a monkey see, monkey do. They just kept picking those letters. But when you do the actual data analysis, you find it's like G, H, P, and O. And they're so odd. Like, why would you ever pick those letters, And by picking some of these more odd letters, you actually get more of the first and last letters. But my main reason of bringing up letter analytics was we were working on a case where the letters, well, we did this analysis and we actually figured out based on the letters that the letter ZA was happening at the end of words. So ZA. Now my name ends with ZA, right? So that's one word that ends with ZA. But we noticed that two given buyers in the system actually had ZA happen as, you know, the letters that were happening for them in their emails. And when we researched it more, it was pizza. It was actually a word called pizza that came out. And it's really odd if you think about it. The word pizza, as much as our kids love it, and I'm sure you love it too, you find that you don't usually email people the word pizza in a business email, but these folks were doing it quite a bit, and that's why the letter ZA was coming out a lot in their emails. So it was a way of like doing word summary to find a keyword to then identify the actual word itself as pizza. And as the story goes, I wasn't there for this particular event, but when they approached the buyers, one of the buyers put them in a room and said, you know, we know about pizza. The person went white, they started confessing, and it was all found because, and they didn't really know very much. I mean, they knew there was pizza involved, and it was kind of an odd name, but it was a way of getting them to realize, or getting that person to realize that they must know, you know, because they figured out of all of my emails, they somehow got the word pizza and realized that I was doing something at the pizza shop where they were actually accepting bribes at the pizza shop associated with the work that they were doing for the company. So with that, I just wanted to kind of bring up our last polling question, and then we have some other just final notes here as we close out the hour. What game show can benefit from the letter analytic approach called Lala? Is it Jeopardy, Press Your Luck, Match Game, or Wheel of Fortune? And looking at the questions, you know, are there any, open resources to learn using Excel for data mining and analytics? There are definitely some books. Yeah, Jim had noted here, there's Bill Jelen as an expert. We do have some videos through AuditNet as well that you know, you could definitely take a look at. That auditsoftwarevideos.com. As what that AuditNet manages, as well as C-Risk, which we'll talk about in a second as well, I believe has some Excel training. Yeah, I think there are some really nice videos out on YouTube. I go out to that, you know, service a lot and learn quite a bit from YouTube. And if you don't like watching videos, as Jim noted with the Google searching, you can, you know, find quite a bit of content and books out there. So we'll just keep this open just another 30 seconds or so. We do have about 88% voted of all the folks, and I believe we've kept about 97% of you online here, so thank you from the start of our time to now. So thanks for holding out with us as long as you did. And we'll just close that polling question just in another 10 seconds. And I will close that poll and share it with everybody. And the correct answer, as you will see in a second here, is Wheel of Fortune. So Wheel of Fortune was correct, and again, we'll hide that. And let me kind of now go over to our slides. So hopefully you'll see our slides here. If you do have any questions in our last few minutes here, feel free to note them. And also, again, wanted to note that there was that white paper on the detecting corruption that you could take a look at. And I probably just in these last couple of minutes here, I did want to kind of shoot it back over to Jim if you wanted to talk a little bit about C-Risk Academy and audit software videos. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to keep posting them. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. I want to thank you, and I also want to thank Grant Thornton for allowing you to present today. This has really been a great webinar with a lot of great information. As Rich mentioned, C-Risk Academy has been partnering with AuditNet, and right now we are offering a free webinar. as well as for today's webinar, you can get 50% off. You can get a 50% discount if you wanted to get CPE. If for some reason you didn't qualify for CPE today, or you weren't interested and you want to go back and watch the webinar, we'll also be sending you a recording, a link to a recording for today's webinar. You will be able to watch that. Unfortunately, you cannot receive CPE for watching the recording that we send to you. You would have to go to C-Risk Academy if you wanted to earn CPE for the webinars. Again, I want to thank Rich for doing a great job, and I think we've answered all of your questions, and we have additional webinars coming up this month as well as for the rest of the year. Rich will be back with us to do 2 additional webinars this year, and we're looking forward to having him back with us. And again, thanking Grant Thornton for allowing Rich to participate in our webinar program. So Rich, if you have any additional questions you want to put out there, or
I don't. I know there's some other things coming in, but no, thank you, Jim. Really, thanks everybody for having me here today. And as we come up on the final minute here, if you do have any final questions, feel free to send them my way as well. I'm happy to answer your questions, and you obviously have my contact info there as well.
Perfect. And as noted in the previous slide on audit software videos, which is now powered by AuditNet, we'll be adding today's recording to that site, so you will be able to watch it there as well. So again, but not for CPE. Please take a moment to fill out the evaluation forms when you exit the webinar. Also, a reminder, if you wanted to get CPE for today, you must be able to receive emails from gensend.io, so you need to make sure that you don't have any firewalls or any filters on your email that would prevent you from getting that email, which will contain the link to download your CPE certificate. So again, thank you all for attending today, and we wish you all a good day and a good week, and look forward to seeing you back with us again. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.